Welcome back to the third episode of our DCAT Professional Manual Training. I'm Dr. Leonard Matheson, a neurorehabilitation psychologist who heads up our interdisciplinary team helping occupational therapists evaluate and treat adults with brain injuries return to their careers. Today we're diving into Chapter 3, Situational Assessment Administration, which is where the DCAT truly shines in mimicking real-world work environments.
Great! I'm looking forward to this. In the last episode, we covered the work sample tests, which felt very structured and focused on quantifying performance. I'm guessing situational assessments are not so structured, and we can be more creative?
You've hit on the key distinction right away. Let's recap briefly from Chapters 1 and 2 to set the stage. Work sample tests and situational assessments are two types of work simulations that can be used for both evaluation and therapy on a progressive occupational demand basis. We use them to find what we call the just right challenge, which is similar to what developmental psychologist Lev Vygotsky referred to as the zone of proximal development. Both approaches teach how cognitive scaffolding can facilitate growth. The significant difference is that we adjust the challenge of work tasks to promote growth. We start with work sample tests, which are highly structured and designed for norm-referenced comparisons. They quantify productivity by measuring the time it takes to complete tasks under very standardized procedures, allowing for reliable comparisons against normative data. Think of it as measuring what a client can produce.
So, precise timing and adherence to strict protocols, such as those in the parts placement and assembly tests we discussed?
Exactly. Now, with situational assessments, the focus shifts. Although still timed, their primary goal is to conduct qualitative observations during work simulations. We're examining how the client approaches the task, how they respond to less structured environments, and how they manage challenges that naturally arise in a workplace. This helps us understand the how and why behind their performance, particularly in relation to executive functions.
I work with a lot of clients who have experienced traumatic brain injuries that involve the frontal lobes. They seem to have the most trouble with executive dysfunction. I expect that the DCAT situation assessments will be especially useful with those clients.
Actually, the original work we did developing the DCAT in my occupational performance lab at the Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis focused on those types of clients. We had a program that developed what we called structured work activity groups. These were projects in which we challenged our clients with simulated work activities to uncover their executive dysfunction so that they could come to grips with those problems in a safe environment. The SWAGs developed organically as our clients came in with different needs. Altogether, we developed about 36 situational assessments and structured several of those into companion work sample tests. We used the work sample test to establish a baseline and then measure progress on a structured basis as the client participated in the clinic and completed homework assignments that we provided. Let's get started with the Chapter 3 situational assessments. As we covered in Chapter 2, before you administer any situational assessment, evaluator preparation is crucial. The manual emphasizes thoroughly reviewing it, performing self-administration, and ideally practicing with a colleague. And as always, client safety is our paramount concern.
Makes sense. I wouldn't want to go in cold. What about the equipment? Is it the same as the work sample tests?
Mostly, but with three significant differences that really set the stage for the situational aspect. We still use all three doll chairs, Baby Bear, Mama Bear, and Papa Bear. You'll still have a standard parts bucket, the assembly manual, an assembled model chair, a stopwatch, and the appropriate situational assessment recording form. There are two different recording forms. One is used for situational assessments without telephone message interruptions, and the other is set up to include those interruptions.
Yes, I see that it asks us to rate our client's ability to shift from one task to another, going back and forth between assembling the chair and recording the telephone messages.
Yes, and there are two other differences. One difference is the inclusion of distractor parts. For the Baby Bear chair, you provide 30 parts, but only 27 are necessary. For Mama Bear, it's 38 parts for 34 needed, and for Papa Bear, 45 parts for 40 needed.
Oh, so extra parts that don't belong? That sounds like it could be confusing for the client.
Precisely. The purpose of these distractors is to increase task complexity and, more importantly, to assess the client's ability to handle ambiguity and frustration. They significantly increase the likelihood of the client making incorrect choices and potentially perseverating on misfitting parts. We are explicitly told not to let the client know about the additional parts.
What if a client asks about them? I imagine that's pretty likely to happen.
A great question, and it's quite common. Your response should be, "I can't provide any additional information. Please continue working." How they react to this instruction provides valuable observational data on their ability to cope with ambiguity and frustration in a work-like setting.
What's the other difference between the work samples and the situational assessments?
In the situational assessment, the client starts with all the parts in the bucket and doesn't have the parts template as an organizational tool. The absence of the template increases the cognitive challenge.
Let's move on to calibrating the assessment. Recall from Chapter 1 how crucial the Just Right challenge is for engagement and progress in rehabilitation. The DCAT situational assessments are specifically designed to offer this. And your client's performance on the baby bear chair work sample test can help you determine the appropriate starting point.
So the work sample results actually inform this assessment? That connects the two modules nicely.
Yes, that's how we designed the test battery. However, please note that the work sample serves only as a helpful guide to help you get started. Situational assessment calibration helps us screen for executive dysfunction, which might be present after a brain injury, stroke, or due to conditions like schizophrenia. We want the task to be demanding but not overwhelming to elicit the most useful observational data. If the task is too complex or too easy, it's less sensitive to behaviors indicating a potential problem with executive dysfunction. As you gain experience integrating it with the other tools available in your clinic, you'll become more precise about selecting the right DCAT level of Just Right challenge.
Okay. Since I'm just getting started, what guidance can you provide?
Here are the guidelines to get you started. If your client performed below the 5th percentile on either the parts placement or assembly test of the baby bear chair work sample, begin with SA1. If they performed at or above the 50th percentile for both work sample tests, start with SA6. For all other clients, SA5 is the recommended starting point.
That makes the selection process clear. But if they just completed a work sample test with the baby bear chair, why would I want to do a situational assessment with the same chair at SA1?
If the client has performed so poorly on the work sample test that they're below the 5th percentile on either subtest, you may have a problem with their reliability. Please remember that the test factors hierarchy prioritizes the reliability of the client's performance over its validity. If we don't have reliability, we can't assume validity.
So I'm conducting a retest to assess their level of effort or identify any other issue that I hadn't considered. Is that it?
Exactly. All of these tests require the client's best effort for the results to be considered valid. That's true of every assessment in our toolboxes. This is one of the ways that we examine this with the DCAT.
I remember from the lesson on work sample tests that the mama bear and papa bear chairs were much more complex.
Yes, that's right. The baby bear chair is the simplest. It doesn't have a seat or back with spindles, unlike the other two. The mama bear chair features 7 spindles for the seat and back, which require placement into offset holes in 3 cross members, adding a layer of cognitive challenge. The papa bear chair is the most complex, featuring 9 spindles and a 45-degree offset handle.
I think you mentioned that you also incorporated some subtle design features that can be particularly challenging if the client rushes the assembly process.
Yes, we wanted to make it difficult enough so that even clients who are accustomed to dealing with these kinds of tasks would find the papa bear chair challenging. We tried to minimize the likelihood of a ceiling effect. A subtle but important design feature for the mama and papa bear chairs is the inclusion of short tubes that are easily misinstalled. If these are placed incorrectly, the 90-degree arm tube acts as a spring, suddenly pulling the short tube out. This is a critical observation point for you as the evaluator to note how the client recognizes and self-corrects errors. As you practice assembling the chairs yourself with a colleague, you'll find that experience invaluable for identifying and dealing with these common mistakes.
Okay, so the complexity of the chairs can dramatically increase psychomotor demand. How about cognitive demand? How did you address that?
Beyond the psychomotor demands, the situational assessments add a layer of cognitive demand through the transcription of telephone messages. This is where the dual task paradigm comes in, assessing critical ONET cognitive demands such as oral comprehension, time sharing, and selective attention.
What do you mean by dual task paradigm? How does that fit into evaluating clients for returning to work?
It's a really big deal in the practice of performance assessment for employment. It's used to measure an applicant's ability to perform two tasks simultaneously. It assesses the ability to manage and divide their attention, as well as how the performance of one task impacts the other. It's particularly useful for roles that require multitasking and efficient resource allocation under pressure. For clients with brain injuries, schizophrenia, or anxiety disorders, it really helps to bridge the gap between the clinic and the workplace.
Okay, so please help me understand how you layer on the telephone message interruptions. How is the difficulty of that task varied?
The difficulty of the telephone message transcription task is controlled by using partially completed message forms. This is an integral part of the progressive demand nature of the DCAT. At the most basic level, the client only needs to record the assessment date and check the recipient's name from a list. This is seen in challenge levels SA4, SA5, and SA6. It's a very simple task that requires relatively low levels of oral comprehension and working memory. The next level of complexity adds recording the time of the call and the caller's telephone number. These are used in SA7, SA8, and SA9. At the highest level of complexity, the client must record all of the above, as well as the caller's name and the actual message itself. These correspond to SA10, SA11, and SA12. In the original psychometric research using the test battery, even competitively employed adults without cognitive impairments often struggled with this level of challenge.
How do you score the accuracy of something like that?
You have a master set of telephone messages against which you compare the client's responses. In this example from Situational Assessment number 11, the client correctly identified the Goldilocks Chair Company employee the message was intended for, recorded the date and time of the call, but made one error in recording the telephone number. As you can see, the person calling and the message were already filled in. The scoring for this component is based on the percentage of messages correctly completed for the items attempted during the assembly.
So that would be the total percent score for all 4 messages?
Yes, that's right. Now, let's walk through the actual setup for a situational assessment, keeping in mind that consistency and client safety are always paramount. The work surface should be a stable, flat table at least 30 by 72 inches and 29 to 33 inches high. This is the setup for the situational assessment without the telephone message interruptions, SA1 through SA3. The unlabeled doll chair parts are in the bucket, approximating the front edge of the table. Critically, the evaluator assembles the model chair outside of the client's awareness. The labels on the model should face the front and point upward, visible to the client. The model is then placed at the rear of the assembly manual, which is in front of the assembly area. The instructions are straightforward and, like the work sample tests, must be given verbatim.
So it's similar to the work sample assembly instructions.
Yes, that's correct. Please read the instructions exactly as they're written. You can pause and repeat them as you need to, but don't make any changes. Here are the instructions. This is a time test of your ability to assemble the doll chair as quickly as possible, exactly as the model. You can refer to this assembly manual or to the completed doll chair. If you drop a part, pick it up carefully and continue. When I tell you to start, work as quickly as you can. I will be timing you. Remember, work as quickly as you can and tell me when you are finished. Do you have any questions? At this point, you pause and answer their questions. After you answer questions, you complete the instructions. When I say go, start assembling the doll chair. Tell me when you are finished. Ready, set, go. You start your timer and keep an eye on the client's progress so that you can maintain safety. You follow the guidelines in the employability rating scale, withholding intervention unless you need to intervene to maintain safety. Please keep in mind that you want to support the challenge but not eliminate it. Unless a safety problem crops up, only intervene if the client gets stuck.
If it's just like the work sample test, what's the point? Since the client isn't being interrupted, what more can we learn from the assessment at this level?
That's an excellent question. We designed the test this way because when we remove the parts template and add the distractor parts to the bucket, we increase the challenge to the client's executive functions. I'm confident that you'll find it a nice transition from the highly structured work sample test to the situational assessment, which has the potential to provide more information that you can use for rehabilitation planning. Always keep in mind that we're providing progressive occupational demands to seek the just right challenge for each of our clients. It takes a lot of discernment on our part, and you'll find that the more you use the DCAT, the more you'll be aware of trying to dial into their sweet spot that challenges the client without overwhelming them.
Okay, so that's for the situational assessment without the telephone message. What's the setup in the clinic for when you have the telephone messages overlaid?
This is where the cognitive load increases significantly. You'll be using a telephone message audio device, which signals an interruption with 2 rings. You'll provide 2 pencils with erasers, and the telephone message pad where the client will transcribe the 4 messages. Those are placed between the parts bucket and the assembly manual, as in the diagram. If a client doesn't have a watch, you'll also need a clock of some sort that the client can use to keep track of time, but they're not allowed to use a timer or alarm. They have to keep track of the time without any assistance. As with the audio playback device, the clock is not placed on the work surface. A wall clock placed on a nearby wall is a good example.
Okay, so how do I instruct the client on handling interruptions?
Here are the instructions for situational assessments. Essay 4 through Essay 12. This is a test of your ability to assemble the doll chair as quickly as possible, exactly as the model. You can refer to this assembly manual or to the completed doll chair. If you drop a part, pick it up carefully and continue. While you are working, you must also record telephone messages. Write the information on this form starting with today's date. If a message concerns a child who may be ill, please notify me immediately. Also, after 7 minutes, remind me to check your progress. Otherwise, there is to be no talking. When I tell you to start, work as quickly as you can. I will be timing you, so let me know when you are finished. Do you have any questions? At this point, you pause and answer the client's questions. If you need to repeat the instructions in whole or in part, you may do so. When I say go, start assembling the doll chair. Tell me when you are finished. Ready, set, go. As I said earlier, you want to support the challenge, but not eliminate it. Unless a safety problem crops up, only intervene if the client gets stuck. You should refrain from providing additional structure or guidance until it becomes essential. Then, you provide only the least necessary intervention to allow the task to progress safely, escalating from self-managed to coached to active supervision if needed. This helps identify their minimum necessary accommodation. This dynamic is crucial because clients with executive function limitations often find simultaneous tasks very frustrating.
Yes, that makes sense. I need to keep that in mind. It's not just a question of watching how they do. I need to be actively involved during the assessment to optimize their safety and productivity. Okay, now I think I'm ready to review the scoring and interpretation of the situational assessments.
As you'll see in the example, Joanna Kim participated in Situational Assessment, Essay 11, administered by Susan Jones. After receiving the instructions, Joanna began the process, referring to the assembled model and using it as a guide occasionally. She did not refer to the assembly manual. Joanna was rated at the competitive level for 2 observations, at the self-managed level for another 2, and at the coached level for 4 observations. She required active supervision, demonstrating a need for assistance in identifying and correcting errors in the assembly. Apparently, she was easily discouraged, and Susan needed to step in to encourage her and help her troubleshoot a mistake that she couldn't manage. Each of these observations was summed at the bottom of the scale and multiplied by a weighted factor, resulting in a total score of 24, which gave her an average score of 2.4. Susan also rated Joanna at an adequate level for effort and recorded that she had 13 correct message transcriptions out of 16 possible, which resulted in an 81% score. Joanna required 24 minutes and 18 seconds to complete the situational assessment. In terms of rule breaks, Joanna had 1 unidentified error. She also had an instructional rule break. She did not notify the evaluator when she finished. As with her earlier work sample test, she had no safety rule breaks. To compare Joanna's average score, we use the Global Employability Rating Scale. On this, we find that her score places her at the coached level. Occasional physical and/or verbal guidance is required to safely and dependably complete the work tasks.
What does that mean in terms of her ability to get back to work? I understand that she is an acute care nurse who experienced a concussion in a fall down the stairs at work.
That's right. Joanna is the example that we use several times in the DCAT professional manual. Performing at the coached level is not acceptable in a competitive employment setting. She would need to get to the self-managed level. Based on this evaluation, we will begin working with Joanna in simulations similar to the tasks she will face on the job, allowing her to develop accommodations that she can manage independently. Once she achieves that, she would be a candidate for a work trial, temporarily with appropriate safeguards. We would work with the HR person at the hospital, as well as her colleagues and supervisor, to develop a return-to-work strategy, typically on a part-time basis. We would continue to be actively involved with her as she begins this transition and be readily available to the hospital personnel who are working with Joanna.
Okay, but I don't know about part-time work. That's not really competitive employment, is it?
No, it's not, and we would not consider that recommendation unless she continued to be our client. We're not going to let the employer or Joanna fly blind without our professional support. Our experiences show that this can make all the difference. Keep in mind that reasonable accommodation means that a reasonable client must be given a reasonable opportunity.
Yes, this has been very helpful, and I feel a sense of empowerment as I consider how it will help me be an advocate for my clients, especially since so much is dependent on their success in our program. What we do is difficult, but these tools are really going to make a difference.
I'm glad you appreciate that. Myself and the other developers of the DCAT are very excited about how this improves our ability to help our clients. Work-oriented rehab is especially important these days as people are living longer and often need to work longer to supplement their income security. Occupational therapists have a crucial and irreplaceable contribution to make to people's lives when they experience an illness or accident that compromises their financial security, both in the near term and how it will affect their retirement plans later on.
Well, I can relate. I have long-term disability insurance that will help if I am genuinely unable to return to work, but it does not contribute to my retirement program, so I need to do everything possible to recover and return to my career if I experience a work disability.
Yes, there's a real and unmet need for what we do. We've got great job security as long as we can continue to make a difference in people's lives. Okay, to sum up, let me highlight the most important issues that we addressed in this session. First, evaluator preparation is crucial. We need to review the manual and administer the assessments to ourselves as we practice with a colleague before we administer it to a client. And the primary focus during administration is on client safety. Second, the DCAT standardized equipment and procedures have been developed by very experienced occupational therapists, vocational evaluators, and psychologists who use them in their practices. Standardization is essential because it enables us to systematically challenge people on a progressive occupational demand basis. The dual task paradigm is very powerful as we overlay psychomotor demand with cognitive demand to seek the just right challenge for each of our clients, thereby optimizing their progress.
So that's it for now. I hope using the dialogue between myself and a virtual OT was somewhat helpful. If you have questions or comments that I can consider for future video lessons, I would be delighted to hear from you. Thanks for your attention. Take care now.